Well, I have to say that's the first time I've asked people in this kind of conference setting to take seats and they actually do it. So thank you. We're on the money. We're on time. That's good. I was hoping there wasn't a picture of me sitting behind me, which is good, because you just need to see one of me. That's more than enough. So I know many of you, but my name's Andrew O'Neill. I work at Healthy Land and Water with the great team you saw talking before, and many more behind the scenes. I'd like to welcome you to this session 2, which we've called Shaping Future SEQ. The next generation is here. So we're going to have a really interesting panel about something that's pretty close to my heart, but I'll leave that for our fantastic panel moderator to introduce. So our panel moderator is Courtney. So for those of you who have been under a massive rock, Pip is the host of Landline, one of the best shows on TV in my opinion. She's been fronting the program since 2012, but has been a roving reporter for 28 years, Pip. Is it okay I said that? Yeah, don't do the maths. Yeah, no, we're not going to do the maths, don't worry. So you're a news journalist, Pip, and you combined your love of journalism and agriculture, joining Landline when you moved to Brisbane in 2003. That's correct. 1990. In Canberra, right, okay, 1993, so even longer. So Pip will be embarrassed that I'll let everybody know this, but she's won tons of awards. Just to name a few, the Queensland Media Award for Excellence in Rural Journalism, the Rabobank Star Prize for Rural Broadcasting in Queensland, also the National Prize and International Star Prize for Rural Broadcasting for a 2011 two-part feature on coal seam gas. Pip was inducted into the Queensland Press Club's Rural Journalism Hall of Fame in 2018. It's a very famous Pip. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you to the stage, Pip Courtney.
Thank you very much, and fantastic to see all these faces. I believe it's your first ever conference. Fantastic, and thank you for all you do for the environment. Well, and if anyone's done the maths, keep it to yourself, please. TV is not kind to old ducks like me, so every year I have with Landline Extra, I'm very grateful. So one of the emerging issues that we have is the global move towards alignment with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And companies from around the world are lining up their corporate social responsibility using the SDGs. And some big names including Nike, Lego, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Mastercard, just to name a few. It's also getting increasing traction in academia and the scientific community. So what are the SDGs, or global goals? Well, they're a collection of 17 interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. The SDGs were set up in 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly and are intended to be achieved by the year 2030. So we haven't got much time left. Securing economic development is a goal, social equity and justice, and environmental protection is the goal of sustainable development. And although these three factors can work in harmony, they can definitely conflict with one another. The goals aim at development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And in the last 6 years, along with governments, an array of industries and businesses have started using the framework to align their own action. However, the clock is ticking, and in many cases, realising the ambitions of the SDGs by 2030 calls for radical acceleration in the pace and scale of uptake. Is this something that South East Queensland could benefit from using in its approach to natural resource management? We'll explore the relevance and preparedness of our region in potentially lining up. Of course, the next three words are on the other page. Sorry. So lining up the SDG agenda and to position solutions for accelerating the transition towards a sustainable and inclusive future. So we have an amazing panel to discuss these issues, and I'd like to introduce first, the interviews will come later, Dr. Claire Brolan. Claire is a research fellow with the Uni of Queensland's Centre for Policy Futures. She's an interdisciplinary technical and academic specialist in health equity in the Sustainable Development Goal, SDG, 2030 agenda. So Claire says that the SDGs speak to the complex problems facing the world today, and that responding to these will require who put all these big words in here for me? We're journalists, we like little words. Interdisciplinary collaboration, governance frameworks and policy and planning, implementation and monitoring partnerships at community, subnational, national, regional and global levels. Welcome, Claire. Now, Claire, you're mic'd up. I'm going to give you just
Yes, I am.
2 minutes to set the scene for who you are and what do you think you can offer in our panel discussion today.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction, Pip. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathering today, the Yagara and the Turrbal peoples, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm Dr. Claire Brolan. I'm from the University of Queensland and I specialise in SDG policy planning and implementation. I guess when I think of the international UN Sustainable Development Goals, I don't think that they're international at all. I think they're highly relevant and deeply and profoundly a local development agenda. If we really look at the UN resolution on the UN SDGs of September 2015, and we look deeply at the content and critically at the content of the 17 SDGs, the 169 targets, the 232 indicators, what we actually see is that we have been implementing, or the peoples on this land have been implementing the Sustainable Development Goal agenda for tens of thousands of years. Since time immemorial. So our Yugara, Turrbal peoples, our Kondamuka peoples, Banjalang, Gabi peoples, this is not a new development agenda. We're coming up to speed. So is it relevant? Highly relevant.
Thank you. Our next panellist is Craig Wilson, and he is an environmental management expert working with the Port of Brisbane. And he has 2 decades of experience in the maritime transport industry and also in a wide cross-section of environmental management issues. And this has included the environmental impact assessment of significant port development projects, marine water quality impacts and impacts on marine flora and fauna from dredging and general port operations. Air quality, noise and emissions impacts, contaminated site investigations and community and stakeholder engagement. Craig has used his position to develop innovative solutions to environmental management problems that not only deliver better environmental outcomes but also better financial outcomes. So welcome, Craig, and if you'd like to give us a little 2-minute summary of what you think you can deliver us today.
Yeah, thanks, Pip. So yeah, so Craig Wilson, I'm the Environment Manager at the Port of Brisbane. So my role is primarily about environmental management of our operations and activities at the port. And before I start, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. So the sustainability goals for us, I think that they've got a lot of relevance and I'll sort of focus on 2 things. And the first one is standardisation of language. And while we still talked about sort of the local application of them, being in the maritime industry, we're obviously an international industry, work across the globe, interacting with other ports and the shipping industry as well. So I think they've got a really strong role to play in sort of standardising the language around sustainability and giving all those different jurisdictions something to aim for in terms of sustainability. And the second one, and I think it's what we've found important in our sustainability journey at the Port of Brisbane has been to remove the environmental stigma, and being environmental manager, it's probably a little bit funny for me to say this, but to remove the environmental stigma from sustainability and make sure we're sort of incorporating the other aspects of sustainability, the social aspects, the government aspects, and even the financial aspects. So it's sort of bringing those other focus areas of sustainability to the fore and have people thinking about that. And certainly what we saw in our journey is when we spoke to our stakeholders, to our staff and our external customers, there was a really, really strong focus and a belief that sustainability was purely an environmental thing. So I think the UN SDGs allows us to remove that environment stigma a little bit and focus on some of those other important aspects of sustainability.
Thank you very much. And our next guest is Melissa Impiazzi. And Melissa is on the Healthy Land and Water Board, and she's had a long career in financial services, predominantly funds management and superannuation. And having spent most of her career strategically managing client relationships, she has a deep understanding of the true value of partnerships and how they can have a significant impact on an organisation's success and direction. Melissa's board and governance experience over the last decade includes Queensland's Community Foundation, the Australian Medical Association Queensland and Social Ventures Australia. And a fun fact, Melissa's future career aspirations includes being an extra in a zombie movie.
I actually took that bit out, but anyway, now everyone knows.
Oh, look, once you write it.
If anyone's casting, can you hear me?
Yep.
If anyone's casting, I'm available. Thanks, Pip.
Cover up that beautiful face.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm from financial services background, and I hope this brings a sort of a unique perspective to the discussion, because these the UN's SDGs are already being implemented in financial services and the investment world in particular, and very actively implemented in superannuation, which is where I spend the majority of my time. The framework, which was up here, but the framework that they use is forming a sort of a universal language that enables superannuation funds, investment professionals and companies to understand and manage and review how companies are performing. And it's, as we've said before, it's becoming a universal language. This is really gaining some traction. The framework helps superannuation boards, fund managers assess what companies are doing, get underneath the companies. Not every one of those goals is used, because there's quite a lot, but they might choose 3, 4 or 5 of them to use in particular and assess how a company is operating, how they're being transparent, and most importantly what their actions are. So for South East Queensland, I think it's a no-brainer. So anyway, I'm in. And this is my zombie face.
Thank you. Our next panellist is Hugh Possingham, Queensland's Chief Scientist. And Hugh is a conservation scientist and mathematician who has held positions... Oh, you've worked out how old I am then, probably, the only... You'd be an anomaly in a room full of journalists, because none of us can do maths. He's a mathematician, and he's also held positions in the uni, public and not-for-profit sector. He completed his PhD at Oxford University in 1987 as a Rhodes Scholar, and was most recently the Chief Scientist at the Nature Conservancy, a global conservation organisation operating in 79 countries. He's the winner of 2 Eureka Prizes. His most significant contribution to conservation was the co-development of Marxan, software first used to rezone the Great Barrier Reef and now used in almost every country in the world to inform the expansion of their marine and terrestrial protected area systems. He has supervised over 200 honours students, doctoral candidates and postdoctoral fellows. His research group has always had a strong focus on bringing mathematical and statistical approaches to solving conservation problems. and he's an avid birder and citizen scientist and member of many community groups. Welcome, Hugh.
Thank you.
You got a little 2-minute spiel for us?
I was doing well until I knew I was sitting next to an aspiring zombie. So if blood starts dripping from her mouth, just tell me so I can run. But, you know, what's more weird than a zombie? A mathematician. So I'm just going to tell you in a few seconds, and probably poorer communication skills, at least you can stumble and moan, how I think. And how do I think? I think in a structured decision-making way. And what I brought to the Nature Conservancy at a global scale, 4,500 staff in 79 countries, was 32 one-syllable words, which is what I say to everybody. What do we want? What can we do? How does what we do change what we want? Pick the best thing to do, look and learn. 32 one-syllable words, and that sums up my entire life, and they made me a professor for that, seriously. So, where did the SDGs fall in? To me, that is life. That is how you make decisions, how NRM bodies work, how you run your own personal life. And where are the SDGs is, number one, what do we want? And having been involved with governments and NGOs for all my life, I find that I often get stuck on that for not 2 days, 2 weeks, sometimes 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 years. So having a short list of 17 to pull off and say, these are things you could want, is a really good start. I will say that, and having a common international language for them is very good. I will say at the Nature Conservancy, we ended up with 41 metrics, not 167. And as a mathematician, it is hard to optimise 167 things, if not 41. So I pulled it down to about five fundamental: 2 human metrics, quality life years, equity, CO2, species and quality habitat, just because it's hard to balance them in your head, but I don't mind having them all there because I don't like forgetting them. But in terms of actually how we operationalised the decisions we made, I found having 5 high-level metrics was very useful. I will also say briefly that you can't remember many numbers. You run your body on how many numbers. I think some of you know your weight, I know my blood pressure, and this is life and death for you, and you can only remember 2 or 3 numbers, you know. So how we expect the general community to understand 17 or 167 metrics or healthy waterways have turned into a report card, which is a wonderful and brilliant thing, but we just need to be careful. What do people remember? They don't remember lists of numbers, they remember stories. What do I remember from this morning? I remember Shannon's story about the 7 ways to say hello across southeast Queensland from different Indigenous First Nations people. What do I remember from this morning? I remember Rod telling me why those seagrass actually stuck from 2016 onwards, because they stabilised the dirt. It was a story based on science, but I remember that. I can't remember 1,000 numbers. So somehow we have to go from them to metrics to stories, because 98% of the people don't understand listed numbers.
That is amazing. And could we get your philosophy, your one-word philosophy on a T-shirt?
Oh, on a T-shirt.
I'm just thinking it's a really... Can you tell us again what it is, the 32 one-syllable words?
What do we want? What can we do? Objectives, actions. How does what we do change what we want, which is a model? Pick the best thing to do, which is an algorithm. Do, look, learn.
Okay, I'd wear that T-shirt.
It's a long one.
Well, Winston Churchill, for effectiveness of communication, he rarely used words over 3 syllables, and mainly 2. So his greatest speech on the beaches, I've been through and counted the syllables, and that's a real lesson in communication for journalists, is as soon as you start using words like interdisciplinary, sorry, no offence, but no, that's a very valuable message, a great communication tool. So, and also we do have people watching online. So welcome to everybody who couldn't be here and is watching. And we'll get the orders for the T-shirts coming in later.
Yeah. What's my cut? I don't know.
We'll talk later.
You might be able to get in the zombie movie with me.
And our last panellist is Simon Costanzo. Dr. Simon Costanzo is the Director of Darwinian Consulting. He has over 25 years' experience working in academia, government, NGOs and the private sector on a wide range of environmental issues. And over the past 10 years, Simon's worked extensively in developing countries where the Sustainable Development Goals have been highly relevant. Being born, raised and educated in Brisbane, Simon is well versed in how SEQ has changed and the challenges it is facing now and into the future. Simon, would you like to
Yes,
have
thanks, Pip.
2 minutes?
Who here had heard of the Sustainable Development Goals before today? Who hadn't? Yeah, it's funny, hey? It doesn't get spoken about a lot in Australia. I first came across the Millennium Development Goals, which were around before the Sustainable Development Goals, and then they expired, and then the Sustainable Development Goals came along, and I'm sure post-2030, which is when these ones expire, there'll be something new. But I'm going to put out there quite a bold statement. There's nowhere in the world that actually meets all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Nowhere. And I'm saying, why can't South East Queensland as a region meet all 17 Sustainable Development Goals by the 2032 Olympics? So, now, if anyone can do it, we can. We've been playing together in the sandpit of South East Queensland for 21 years. We've got a council of mayors that are all cooperating. We've got groups like Healthy Land and Water that can coordinate part of that package of 17 goals. We've got other groups in the region that can help us do the other parts and bring them all together. And then come 2032, it's not going to happen in Paris. So if someone's got the idea there, I don't think they're going to be able to do it. Then it's not going to happen in Los Angeles. It might happen in South East Queensland. And imagine casting the eye of the international community over us then, and us being the first place on earth to do it. And, you know, we're not talking about nuclear fusion, we're talking about no poverty, zero hunger, gender equality, things that we should all be striving for. And let's not think that, you know, we'll just run out of steam and won't get there. Let's do it. So that's my take.
Right, so now let's delve into these very clever minds that we have here on this stage. I would like to start with Claire. If you look at the SDGs in a developed and prosperous region such as South East Queensland, how can we combine and contribute to the global effort? And should we even bother? Isn't it too hard?
I think I answered, should we even bother, with my introductory spiel about the relevance of the local relevance of the SDG agenda to South East Queensland. And just to really reinforce what you said, Simon, I utterly agree. You know, we have this moment and this opportunity in South East Queensland to be the leaders when it comes to SDG implementation, which I think is very exciting. And the key challenge now is how to do it. And I don't think it's a key challenge. I've had the great pleasure and opportunity of talking and interviewing key people, personnel, policy thinkers, strategists in the corporate world, in government, in civil society, particularly in Indonesia, in Germany and Mexico, and in other countries who are implementing the SDGs. And it just takes, what it takes is hard work. You need to have some of the best and brightest minds around the table, and you need to localise the SDG targets and indicators. You need to look at the science, the data, the disaggregated data, identify the data gaps, and also contextually think about, well, what are our local community needs, our local community priorities, what are our local environmental needs and climate change priorities, and then really go from there. So the how-to, it is difficult. It's not easy, as a lot of the international policymakers I speak to emphasise. But once you start doing it, the benefits outweigh the challenge of doing it.
And if I could ask you, Simon, Bob Hawke famously tripped himself up by saying no child will be living in poverty by X date. So do you think some of those little tiles up there with some really fantastic goals, no poverty, all of that, does some of it seem, thank you, They're on the ball over there, aren't they? Some of those just seem too hard. We all know that they're important, but if you look at state, federal parliament, like, do you think any of those things are up of mind with the politicians at the moment?
Oh, well, they should be. Look, my little social bubble in southeast Queensland, you know, I don't think poverty is an issue. I don't think hunger is an issue in my bubble. But there's a lot of people that I'm sure do in southeast Queensland wish we were achieving all 17 of these. The UN, to land on these 17, the UN surveyed 7 million people from, I think it was 193 countries. And so they're not, I think, the question, I think that it's a very top-down bureaucratic process of reporting SDGs, you know, to the UN. Australia reports them. No one in Australia talks about them. We don't know what they are potentially.
Is that because that conversation's happening in poorer countries and we're just a bit maybe too rich and too lazy? And
yeah, on the whole. But like I said, there's still a huge element of society that, if you've ever worked in the social services space, that these are highly relevant to them and we should all be talking about them. Anyway, my point being is that this top-down bureaucratic approach is very, it does the 17 values a disservice, in my opinion, because these are on the ground, individual, local issues. And so, and yes, it's maybe too hard because there's too many indicators and we can't wrap our heads around things, but when in fact, I think they are all downscalable, and that we should all be, I mean, how is zero hunger not downscalable to the individual person? It should be. So that's my roundabout reaction to that, is that I think, yes, they're broad, yes, they're hard, but if we're creative, and South East Queensland's got some pretty bright minds, we can certainly, you know, make them a reality here.
And is that why the Olympics date is a good thing, because you actually give people something to target, whereas at the moment you look at that and you go, well, someone else will look after that. But
well, yeah, I love a deadline. Don't give me a deadline and I won't finish it. But these expire in 2030 and the Olympics in 2032, so there's a bit of a disconnect there. But they'll be replaced with something, and there's going to be lessons learnt about how to deliver these from this 15-year period. And so wouldn't it be great if what we do in South East Queensland is influential in how the next set of goals are rolled out and delivered at a potentially more local scale? I'm talking a lot.
And Melissa, if I could go to you, the science tells us we need to reduce emissions. Well, what kind of partnerships are needed to achieve net zero?
Well, in the corporate space, and my reference obviously is financial services, I'll just give you a bit of a snippet as to how it's actually implemented in superannuation. So let's go up to a superannuation board. Think about the superannuation fund. If you're not self-managed, of course, that you'd be managing, that board would create what they call an environmental, social and governance policy. That ESG policy then informs a whole lot of investment strategy, and that investment strategy is then executed via a whole lot of fund managers, which, you know, you would know some of the names around the place. That framework that they use, then the fund managers pick companies to invest your money in. So, And that's sort of from the top down in terms of policy and implementation. From the bottom up, the companies would have corporate social responsibility policies themselves, and they'd have to disclose those policies and actions, and with a whole lot of transparency. So in this instance, I think the financial services sector can be using SDGs for good. They don't often use their money and power for good, but they can use their influence for good, because what happens is members of those superannuation funds, myself included, when you look at the publicity that's around Rio Tinto's Juukan Gorge, which was mentioned before, people won't tolerate this sort of poor corporate response, you know, corporate practices, and members of super funds start to revolt. So this is the bottom up. This is all of us going, hang on a minute, my fund is invested in Rio Tinto, and And so as the earth and as everything starts bubbling up and as the policy starts pushing down from the boards, action happens. And when that action happens, fund managers divest. And so what happens is people start taking their money out of companies who don't provide appropriate, transparent reporting, and their actions don't represent or reflect their policy. So I think this is how we need to operate, that it's not just very pretty coloured tiles. There's many actions underneath that which we'll get into, and there's many ways that we can influence change, not just financial, but through a variety of other practices.
So that is something you could do as an individual. You can email your super fund and say, I'm not terribly...
Yeah, sorry, this is general advice too, by the way. Not personal advice.
Disclaimer will be somewhere.
But get onto your superannuation fund and have a look, and they will have these up there. And what will happen is they'll choose 4 or 5 in particular ones, and as was mentioned before, Hugh, that there is a lot, and so it's very hard to implement all of them at once. But they might have 5 or 6 that they, that they represent their members in healthcare, for example. So that'll be a very strong anchor for them, and then that anchor will flow through to the fund managers, who will have to manage the companies and the proxy voting and all of that sort of stuff to ensure these companies are keeping to their practices. So.
And as a cynical journalist, sometimes you can have all sorts of things around. Everyone's got one in their workplace probably about what our goals are, and sometimes staff walk past and go, bullshit.
Yeah.
So what is the sort of due diligence that in your world can actually happen? I mean, there's greenwashing. I suppose we all know that is a term.
Yes.
I don't know what you can... I can't come up with a smarty pants way of saying how you can just sort of wash all of this and go, oh, look what we've got on our website.
It looks like a Skittles packet, so maybe we'll call it Skittles
Skittling.
know.
So how do you make sure that what they say, they actually follow through, and there is due diligence, and they only don't just do something if it hits the media?
Yeah, no, that's right. Well, this is where the fund managers come into it, and they actually spend a lot of time in companies, in their offices, with CEOs, and they go out to site, they visit, they understand, and they do this very often. So it's twice a year. Equity picking analysts, you might choose those people that actually go specifically to do this. And when you get into the detail, you actually see reports from fund managers saying how they fared against these, and some fail. And if they fail repeatedly, they then provide information to the superannuation fund, and they just suck their money back. So.
Well, Craig,
I was going to jump in.
Yes,
quickly.
well, I was going to ask you a question next.
We're probably a really good example of that work in process. So Port of Brisbane Proprietary Limited is owned by 4 big asset investment funds, IFM and QIC being 2 of those. So QIC is the government-run investment fund, and they're getting all their funding from superannuation and pension companies, and certainly the pressure on us from those that they make up our board. So certainly the pressure from those 4 investors since probably 2018, and that's certainly where we reinvigorated our sustainability journey, has been quite relentless. And sort of some of the examples of the things we do, we now participate in sort of industry rating schemes. So GRESB, which is the Global Real Estate Sustainability Board, we now participate in that process where we have to put our submission in and get rated and provide that back to our investors, who provide it to those superannuation and pension funds to demonstrate that, okay, we're investing in this asset, the Port of Brisbane, and that asset is performing to a level of sustainability. So if you're ticking that, I want my investment to go to responsible investment, we've got to demonstrate as an asset that we are a responsible investment for those investors.
And Craig, is that sort of pressure enough, or do you think that the corporate sector needs incentives, policy or legislation to support investments in sustainability?
Certainly in my seat, it's enough. We sort of getting emails probably every week from our different investors, or what's going on in this aspect and this aspect. So maybe in other areas it could be bolstered a little bit, I think. I can't really give an example of where, but I'm sure there's opportunity.
I'd just like to jump in and say, look, it's the corporates in this country that are really leading the way when it comes to SDG implementation. And I really want to praise the corporates on that
Yeah,
front.
they're starting to,
And whether it's revenue, reputation or regulation, whatever
all of the
carrot
above,
of the stick or all of the above, it's our corporate community that is leading SDG implementation.
Yeah, and I was going to add as well, in terms of government regulation and support, they probably lag a long way, and certainly we're trying to do some innovative work around renewables. And again, the government being so far behind puts blocks in place because they're not keeping up, and we're trying to do all this innovative leading edge stuff, and you just can't do it because the government legislation and policy is lagging so badly that it makes it really, really difficult.
Well, I can see a parallel there with the farmers that I report on. You hear the politicians that allegedly represent them talking about, oh, we're a bit worried about net zero by 2050, and yet the really good farmers, you know, the horses bolted, they're already doing that, and they're scratching their heads going, can you not keep up with science and what we're doing? So, well, Hugh, offsetting emissions can be achieved at a lower cost overseas. So how do we maximise the benefits for biodiversity in our community in southeast Queensland from the net zero movement?
Yeah, and the carbon and the is clearly delivering on 13, but if we're smart, it'll deliver on half a dozen of the things on the board. It's a big pile of money. In my last months at the Nature Conservancy, Amazon came through the door and said, here's $100 million US dollars for biodiverse carbon, and we have another billion behind that if you can deliver that sensibly in the next couple of years. So I don't think anybody in Australia realise how big this market is. Of course, Queensland has the best opportunity in the planet. I mean, reasonably good accounting systems, supposedly stable, something that looks like a democracy, most biodiverse state in the second most biodiverse country in the planet, and we are the 16th biggest country in the world, and we go from a rainforest to a desert. So if we can't do it, I don't think anybody can do it. Why aren't they beating down the door, in fact, to spend the money here? What can we offer in terms of the price? Of course, it will be exactly what Melissa was talking about, which is we should be giving gold standard biodiverse carbon and all those other benefits, water quality on top of those things. And we have the accounting systems, the NRM bodies have done an incredible job, the scientists have done an incredible job. So they have no doubt what they're getting. And I'll be honest, even TNC would get into trouble, and there is now scandal after scandal brewing across the world in the NGO movement where people have sold carbon that doesn't really exist or is not properly accounted for. So my message is always very simple: do it really, really, really well. Nobody, when you go to Egypt, which we did 25 years ago, and nobody wants to have an Egyptian pound because nobody knows what it's worth. So, you know, if you have a currency that wanders every day up and down 10%, and when you leave the country is worth almost nothing, nobody wants to buy that currency. And if you buy carbon in a country or from organisations that are dubious, then they'll quickly get burnt, they'll realise it's shit carbon, and hopefully they'll come here. But we've just got to be absolutely squeaky clean. And so very open and very transparent. I would like to see the carbon market be having more tangible data on the web that anybody can look at.
So the junk, do you think the market will sort out what's a junk credit and what's...
Slowly, yes. But
not there yet?
Certainly not there yet, no, because so many people are confused by these markets. And let's go to the next step, which will be biodiversity credits. And CO2's a molecule, last time I looked. It's not that complicated. There's a couple of others involved. Biodiversity is 10 million species, 700 ecosystems just in Queensland. So how are you going to do that? So you're going to have to be more careful. You can sell that. And there are already companies and already super funds talking about being biodiversity positive. What does that mean? And who's going to do it? And we have, as I routinely pointed out, the best environmental scientists in the world, by far, per capita, by any metric. 32 of the top 300 climate scientists are Australians, by a Reuters analysis, not an Australian analysis, a Reuters analysis, 32 of the top 300 climate scientists. It's 11%. Now, we just ranked 4th in the world in terms of high-quality cited scientists, above Germany, above Canada. So if we can't do it and get it right, then nobody should be able to.
Okay, can we not put that on the T-shirt? It's a bit
As
depressing.
well, this goes on the back, maybe.
Okay, we'll put that on the back in mirror writing. We have 34,000 kilometres of coastline in Australia. What about blue carbon? Can we be the blue carbon innovators? Like, you've got all those amazing scientists, a lot of them which work in Tasmania, which is my home state. So is blue carbon an opportunity, or is that something 20 years down the track?
No, I think it is now, yeah. It's in many ways, I mean, there's arguably no more important hectare than the hectare that's within a kilometre of the coast. That near coastal ecosystem is providing so many of these things at a massive rate per hectare. I mean, the natural capital people have known this for years: food, carbon, infrastructure, protection. So yes, there are some huge opportunities there, and there are groups and companies and groups of scientists who are well advanced in this space.
Well, Claire, with the SDGs, what do we know about how to optimise the goals through partnerships to achieve the maximum achievement?
Well, what my research has shown...
Can you use your mic?
Okay, well, my research has shown is that there's a number of overlapping ways. So we need multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral partnerships.
Multidisciplinary?
Yeah, multidisciplinary, or all of those multis.
Sorry, I'm going to dream in...
So basically, we can't be working in our little, in our governmental silos. We need a whole of government approach. We need government to be working with corporates, to be working with civil society, to be working with our First Nations leaders and communities, for example. Secondly, we need to ensure that we actually identify what are, in Southeast Queensland, what are our targets, what are our indicators that are relevant to the local context. By having all these people, these groups around the table, and my experience is that the best people on those multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary teams are people who are systems thinkers. So people who can join the dots, because there is so much overlap and cross-cutting between the goals and targets and the indicators, that you really need people who are very strong critical thinkers who can identify the benefits and the trade-offs between the goals, and who are very good people persons in terms of being able to speak to the different stakeholders in a language they understand, because that's how you get mutually beneficial partnerships and mutually beneficial outcomes. Because, as I said, it's not easy. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of actors, a lot of interests, but it's getting in there and doing the work.
And could you see sort of a sweet spot where if you're trying to achieve an environmental goal, you actually can help achieve or have some growth or progress in any of the others?
Well, I actually flip it around. I think if we look after the health and well-being of our local population, and we don't have poverty, and we have 1 in 5 people in Southeast Queensland who aren't eating, there is real issues around hunger. I think if we look after our human capital, and vice versa, if we have a healthy human capital, we look after our environment. It's all interrelated.
Melissa, you deal in facts, figures, numbers a lot. What do you think about that point? If you look after the human capital, that all of this can follow?
I think logically, yeah, I think it should, but I actually think I'm also a compliant rules person. I think we need a framework to be able to operate and measure. The measure of success, I think, is really important. So I think... I think it's a bit more complex, I suppose. And here we are talking about the fact that government hasn't come to the party. You know, we've got this bubbling at the bottom up. We've got this top-down corporate. But ultimately, we're looking for guidance around policy, compliance, structure, I suppose, to be able to then measure success.
So government needs to get on board for Goal 17?
Yes.
Do you think they're leaving it to volunteer groups and the corporate world?
I have to say, when I saw what we were talking about today, I'm going, gosh, this is a bit late, isn't it? Like, you know, aren't we already doing this? So yes, I'm afraid I think let's put our skates on.
Well, Hugh, goal 14 and 15 is on biodiversity and natural systems. Will we need to compromise on some of the other tiles up there to achieve 14 and 15?
No.
Why not?
Oh, yeah, that is.
That was a nice one-word answer.
You think, as chief scientist, I should provide some evidence?
Absolutely.
Bound to happen one day.
If you want to go down the anecdote road,
I'll find you out.
15 months into the job and they've got me. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's actually the worst thing is it is a myth, isn't it? That, I mean, I did briefly mention trade-offs at the beginning, but it is a myth that you have to trade these things off. Particularly, I think the myth, I don't know who propagated this, but anything that was good for the environment is going to cost society money. And it's going to cost companies money and the environment money. But there's just no data that supports that. There's no evidence. I know that it costs certain individuals money. I think it sometimes makes the filthy, filthy rich get slightly less filthy, filthy rich, some of these regulations.
pass
That's
the
a good
tissues
thing.
around. Yeah.
That's right, exactly. So it gets to the equity point. But I mean, I've seen no evidence, and I think increasingly the mechanisms, the pressure that the public puts on big super funds, investments, that in fact they're all very much aligned. There's no doubt about it, I think, to Claire's point, and it goes back to this famous piece of work called Kuznets curve, which is Kuznets curve says many of you will know about it, is basically a country first develops rapidly by exploiting and destroying environmental resources, and it's only when it's rich it starts dealing with most of those 17 things. That's another myth, because in fact we did a big analysis about 5 years ago and showed that of those middle-ranked countries, half of them had booming economies and their environment improved. So there are all these myths out there. I suppose they're built out of Keynesian economics from the 1920s, that the economy booms when you destroy the environment, and I think there's no evidence at all. So we just need to get rid of that myth. And there's plenty of data behind the fact that that myth does not exist.
Okay, thank you. How are we going for time? Where's my timekeeper? Okay, I've just got one question here for Simon. Can we use the Olympics as this stick to beat government with, and as a way of a carrot to, like, there will be so many journalists in Queensland at that time, and they don't just come here to do sports stories. They go back with stories about everything, from tourism to politics to food. So is it a carrot or a stick to get there?
I don't know. What do you guys think?
It's certainly a carrot anyway, I think, and given enough time, and I think we have enough of a runway, so long as we actually get the engines fired up now, to actually be a carrot. So when it turns into a stick is if 5 years we come back to this seminar, conference, and we've got it back up on the screen and we're going, oh, remember those SDGs? I don't know, what do you...
Well, I think it does rely on stories to a certain extent. So we need things that are simple enough to explain to the public. I said to my minister, why don't we run the Olympics in the shade of native trees? Oh, the marathon. So the marathon's 42 kilometres. Wouldn't it be nice? I saw people routinely running the marathon in full sun. Wouldn't it be nice if the marathon was entirely shaded? So that can happen now. Now, it's not going to save the biodiversity of southeast Queensland, but it is a symbol of, growing trees. Trees provide shade, more shade, less marathon runners fall over in the sun. So I think we do need to get the storylines right about what does a Green Olympics look like, and many different things will appeal to different individuals.
I like that.
Yeah, a story that I've just finished doing is with a couple who grow mature trees, and they've done Hong Kong, Disney, Shanghai Disney, and they said, can you just put in the story if the Queensland government needs to start ordering its trees now, and they want to have Australian natives everywhere. But, that is a story. So a journo from another country comes here, wow, look at all the trees. Yeah, do you want to meet the people who grew them? That's a story. That's not some sort of really hard to process government policy. It's a story about people. So,
Yeah, I like it.
so you were going to jump in, someone there?
I was going to say, I think it does need to be a carrot. I think if you force people to do it, then you don't end up with the right outcomes. You've got to have people that want to do it. They become engaged, and then you get really good outcomes. If you're sort of forcing people to do things, and yeah, it just doesn't work.
I'm interested, like I have never heard a colleague or a friend say, hey, what do you think about how we're going on the SDGs? Do you reckon we're going to get there? Will our country get there first? How's India going? How do you get people talking about it outside this room and the disciplines and the departments and the areas that you all work in?
Can I just say, when it comes to, for example, the country of Indonesia, Indonesia has at the highest level, they have actually implemented a law that SDG implementation is mandatory. It must occur at all levels of government. So the language of the Sustainable Development Goals, these cross-government partnerships, these local government, regional, national government partnerships, it's by the by, they have this wonderful ministry at the very top called Bappenas. So they're the Ministry of National Development, who is leading and coordinating this with the President's endorsement. So it is mandatory there. And it becomes the language of implementation. And so, I think there is, Germany, the Germans are just so far ahead in this stuff. We could, spend 6 months over in Berlin or in Munich and have, lots of really good chats about how are they doing it, and how are they doing it at that policy and planning level and getting it into at that very granular and ground level, because it's happening elsewhere. We're in this very insular bubble in Australia, and we forget that people, countries, communities, low, middle, high-income countries, they're way ahead of us. We're catching up.
I've had a chance to think about your question.
Okay. He's back, ladies and gentlemen, he's back.
So does everyone know that Australia's number 37th on the list of countries meeting the SDGs, behind Lithuania? And Finland's leading the charge. And it was Sweden, but they're at loggerheads. So your question was around carrot and stick, and I'm going to avoid that part. But in terms of, we make report cards. I'm a report card practitioner. Someone was asking me before, what do I do? That's my answer. And the reason they've been really successful in developing countries is because they're very overwhelmed by the challenges that are ahead of them. So many things to fix. And we come in and we give them a tool that helps them refine down to a certain number of things what they can use to assess the health of their system and then make investments from there. And that's kind of like what's happened here, like 7 million people interviewed. These are the 17 things that we think make a sustainable country. So moving forward we've got 10-year timeline, and I mentioned deadlines before. I love a deadline rather than just developing something new and wait till it gets boring and old. Let's, we've got some serious targets we could meet by then, but also what's going to happen along that journey is going to be heaps of investment. So the government is like, holy dooly, we actually won the Olympics. It's one of those sorts of, I won the prize and I've got to go up and now make a speech. And so wouldn't it be great though, this could give them the framework they need in terms of their investments. Whenever they make a decision on a new stadium, whenever they make a decision on a new train line, how does it help us meet these 17 SDGs, which are globally, it's a global blueprint of how to live a good and healthy life. So that's how I think. I think the SDGs, if someone said, yeah, let's meet them all, even if we don't meet them all, that's a good framework for us to go by.
And you're all, it sounds like some of you are very well travelled, investigating how other countries are going. Why is Finland leading?
Oh, good.
Because it's a small country, or?
Yeah, well, those Nordic countries all seem to be, they're all at the top of the ladder. And we hear about, they pay high taxes, everyone gets a meal at school, and it's just this sort of, I don't know, who's from Finland here, or Sweden? They got nothing better to do. Yeah, that's good. I don't know why those Nordic countries are leading the charge, but they seem to be able to... Anyone here got an opinion on that?
Well, Claire, why is Indonesia doing so well?
Yeah, I think it's because they've been doing it for a long time. It's normal. The SDG uptake wasn't this big international stretch. The German government, for example, it implemented its first national sustainable development strategy, the NSDS, in 2004. So, we don't have anything like that in our country. So we are, again, as I said, so far behind, but we should use that as the catalyst and the impetus and the inspiration to get so far ahead.
Okay. Well, I don't want to hog the questioning, so we've got 2 mics. So is there anybody would like to ask one of our panellists, or all of them, a question?
Just because people were talking about Finland, Finland also lead in education as well in the world. They're very community-based. They're very education is really high up in their agenda. All the teachers, for example, were in education, so are very, very highly renowned, and they're very community-focused too. So all students, for example, go to their local schools. If you look at Southeast Queensland, people don't do that. So you look at partnerships and communities and things like that, and Finland also lead that way as well, which I don't know if that's a little in. So I guess then a question could be, I know that Port of Brisbane, for example, are very invested in all of the partnerships. So I wondered if Craig just wants to talk about some of the broad brush things that they do.
Yeah, cool. So I guess partnerships makes up a key part of our sustainability strategy. So it's built on 4 key pillars, which is people, planet, prosperity and partnerships. And we certainly see partnerships being a big thing of what we do. And as Di said, we work with education, getting kids in, teaching them about the port and what we do, getting to understand. We sort of sit out there at the mouth of the river, a bit out of the way, and no one really knows what we do. We work with local community groups. We have our community grant scheme. We do a lot of work with environment groups as well to build our rapport there, and certainly social licence to operate is becoming a really important part of our business, probably in the environment space, more important than regulatory compliance. It's critical, I suppose, in the environment space that we demonstrate that we are there and we are doing the right thing by the environment and minimising our impacts, because we do undertake activities that have environmental impacts. So we need to demonstrate that when we undertake those activities, yes, we will impact, but yes, we are doing the best we can to try and minimise those impacts.
I have a 3-word answer.
Go ahead, Mr. Churchill.
Tax is civilisation.
Like that.
And we've just spent decades trying to erode the tax base.
Yeah. We'll come up with ways to get around it. Yeah.
That's better for the back of the T-shirt, I think. Tax is civilisation.
I think
it's easier.
I think you've got a range of
Bumper
T-shirts.
sticker.
Mugs, barbecue aprons, the whole bit. Merch. Well, that's how we'll get there with merch. Anybody else got a question? Over here? If you could... Oh, over there?
Narelle McCarthy, Sunshine Coast Environment Council, and also with the South East Queensland Catchments Members Association. Thank you all very much for your contributions on the panel and in your broader work. As we are in a climate emergency and face biodiversity crisis, how can we ensure that the SDGs are actually elevated through the Olympics, if that is one of those catalytic opportunities, that projects and investment in green and blue infrastructure, for example, is actually prioritised. So we have a climate positive Olympics, which is contractually required of the 2032 Games in this time frame that we have, when there might be projects that might not otherwise be contemplated or fast-tracked under this, Olympics lens, to make sure we do have a positive legacy after these games, and also leading up to them as well.
He's a thinker, this
that
one.
Well, I think we've had good answers to that. I mean, we should demand that every project it reports on those metrics. What did it do for equity? Yeah. That train line. What did it do for equity? And so demand it.
Yeah, should be in every meeting room, on every cover of every book. As you go to meetings, every person goes, so how do these influence my, scorecard, really? And every business, every deal should be referenced to it and how it's impacting the deal and how it's impacting on the SDGs. That's how it works in funds management. Well, look, the SDGs just give a framework and I think send a clear message to other, client relationship, transactional relationships. If you're building stuff or planning stuff, to everyone go, okay, these are the rules of engagement. This is how we're going to play the game. So those groups then go back to their groups and go, oh my God, we need to sort out stuff. So I think it happens organically that way. Then in, at a transactional level, there needs to be requirements where great environmental scientists and people come in and I don't know if this happens. It does happen, but I'm not sure if it happens without policy, without government intervention. So there is a gaping hole, in my humble opinion, here. So of that.
I think if there was investment in that space, it wouldn't be viewed as a white elephant at the end of the games. Right?
Mm. And with the hundreds and hundreds of journalists that will be here reporting on sport, travel, culture, imagine if the Games doesn't meet its target, that the narrative around the world will be Queensland had this great opportunity and then they blew it, and they had all these years to do it, and they blew it.
Yep.
That's not a good story that you want to see out there.
Righto. Back, take it.
Oh no. Now we've got one more down here.
I think we're wrapping up, aren't we?
Time boss lady, yeah. Make it.
Hi, my name is Maggie. I'm with Ocean Connect and Griffith University. I'm also part of Hugh's PhD lab, so it's great to hear from you, Hugh. My question was around youth and creating more platforms for them to get more involved within the sustainability goals. At the moment, sustainability is not really included within the school curriculum, the national school curriculum, which is a concern that they're actually not knowing what these goals are and how we can create more human agency around the understanding of these goals. So just some thoughts around how we can create more human agency for youth to have more understanding around tangible actions to achieve these at their level. And creating a platform for them.
Well, I know our Minister, Megan Scanlon, is very concerned about that very issue. So she thinks so many researchers in universities and also other NGOs driven by old people do things for youth. They do research for youth. They never ask the youth what they want. So I think we do need exactly what you're talking about. The youth are remarkably disempowered and everything comes from above, from age, and they're not engaged in what is the research needs in a university that will meet. And all that we've been talking about co-development of research is seemingly missing out on young people. And I know that she personally is is embarking on a process to turn that around a lot, because she's the Minister for Science and Youth Affairs.
It'd be great to see something, I think, included in the education curriculum as well. I've got a young son, and yes, he does sort of elements of sustainability at school, but I mean, he wouldn't come home and tell me, oh, we learned about the UN SDGs today. So I guess it'd be nice to see that sort of incorporated into the sort of early learning, even high school as well, sort of curriculum. So school kids, children are learning about the UN SDGs at a young age.
And for my vote, if you're in a super fund, get invested in the ESG one. That's the one that starts to make an impression. So get engaged in your super. There's my plug.
You're trying to make my job harder, aren't you?
That's it. Well, that's it. No more questions from the floor, but I'd just like to, if everyone could put their hands together for our very clever, insightful, great job. Great job. Yeah, well done. Thank you all very much, and I think I'm handing over to Andrew O'Neill again.
For what it's worth, I used to live in Sweden, and I can tell you a bit about how they make it happen. I think Simon said they're the second, and they have been the first, and they jostle with the other Nordic countries. That's true. There's two things, I think. One, they're socialist. That makes a very big difference, and you can like it or not, but they invest a lot in social projects and through the economy that way. But they also indoctrinate their kids very, very early. I took my kids when I was there 2 years ago to science museums all through Scandinavia, and every single one had SDG blocks for little kids to play with. It's almost like giving them cigarettes back in the day. So, but they're the good ones. Not cigarettes, SDG blocks. So I think that's my little mantra there. No cigarettes, SDG blocks instead. And the kids are playing with SDG blocks, and they're saying, "Oh, what's this?" And they're looking at them and they're reading them, and and I think soon there'll be Hugh's merch.